What's up, guys? My name's Brandon and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss even more new features in iOS 17.1 that's dropping next week. We're going to talk about how Apple trolled us this past week, a crazy new tool that Apple is working on, a crazy AirTags story, and more. And of course, if you want to stay updated with all things Apple, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. All right, so let's first start by talking about iOS 17.1. So this update is the first major iOS 17 update, and it is dropping early next week, most likely on Monday. So I do want to talk about some additional details on this because we did actually get a second RC version yesterday on Friday. So this is only for the iPhone 15 models, and you can see the new build number there is 21B77. And again, only for the iPhone 15 models because it does fix one bug that was still remaining in the first RC, and this is related to cinematic mode. Now, I did also want to touch on the big screen burn-in issue. So I didn't talk about this in any previous videos because I was really kind of waiting to see what Apple was going to do, but a lot of users jumped to just claiming that the iPhone 15 had a major burn-in issue, where Apple actually pushed out the RC this week, the first RC, and they mentioned that they fixed this bug and they call it image persistence. And that's not just what they call it, that's actually what it's called. It's not actually screen burn-in because screen burn-in is permanent. Image persistence is just something that's temporary and it goes away after a while. It doesn't stay there forever. But nonetheless, Apple did fix this with 17.1, and it made even more headlines after the fix because a lot of people were amazed that Apple could even fix this via software. But the thing I found most interesting here is the fact that Apple mentioned this in a support document back in 2022 and that it is expected behavior with their OLED displays. So if you take a look here, they say that this is expected behavior to expect slight visual changes, and it says it can include image persistence or burn-in, where the display shows a faint remnant of an image even after a new image appears on the screen. Image persistence is temporary and disappears after a few minutes of normal use. Burn-in can occur in more extreme cases, such as when the same high contrast image is continuously displayed at high brightness for prolonged periods of time. And there's also an interesting note down here as well that mentions that the auto brightness function can further reduce the effects of burn-in and image persistence. So a good way to prevent this from happening to you, and they patched it so it's not going to happen, but just to know in the future, auto brightness could help reduce the impact or even the likelihood of image persistence occurring on your device. So I just found it pretty interesting that Apple mentioned that this bug, this quote-unquote bug, as normal behavior. So I guess there was something in 17 that maybe made this occur more often than it should. I'm not exactly sure because Apple called it expected behavior, but yet they patched it in 17.1. So I don't know. And by the way, speaking of that random shutdown overnight bug that a lot of people have been having, and I've not been able to reproduce myself on any of my devices or iPads or anything, but yeah, so that has not been fixed, and I don't know if it's going to be fixed because like I've mentioned before, this has been happening for several years, at least 3 years this has been happening. So it's not something new with iOS 17, it's not something new with iPhone 15, this has been happening for a while. I did think that Apple was going to potentially, put out a statement or maybe fix this in the RC build or RC2 build, but it seems like that's not going to happen. They could in the future, but like I said, this is kind of an old issue, so I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. So I did also want to mention a few things about 17.1 before that release date on Monday, and the first thing I actually noticed this past week is that notification sounds do seem to be a little bit louder than they were on 17.0.3. For some reason, that's been one of the top complaints I've heard from a lot of people, is that notification sounds are just simply too low in iOS 17. So after updating to 17.1 RC, you might notice an improvement there. Now, I did also test out the new AirDrop feature. So if you go to your settings, general AirDrop, we now have the use cellular data when out of range. So I tested this just to kind of see how it worked, and I was kind of let down because nothing special happened. I thought there could have been some type of iCloud UI or something, but nothing happened. So what I did was I actually just turned off Bluetooth. So you can do this by either going far away or you can just simply turn off Bluetooth, because the way this works, as it says, is over Wi-Fi or cellular. It has nothing to do with Bluetooth. Now, of course, you do need Bluetooth turned on to enable, the initial AirDrop transfer process. But once you have that on and once you, initiate that first transfer, you can turn Bluetooth off on both devices, and the data, whatever you're sending, the video, the photo, whatever, is still going to send. So I tested it both when I'm far away. So I drove away from my phone that was airdropping a big file, and there was no difference from when I did that versus when I just turned Bluetooth off completely. So both files did go through though eventually, and that was pretty cool to see. I'm calling this AirDrop 2.0. And I did also want to talk about the music favorites feature. So Apple Music really got a big upgrade with 17.1. Like if you're an Apple Music user, not only do we have the favorites where you can of course, go into playlists and you can filter your playlist by favorite. All that stuff's cool. I mean, that's a cool feature. But the thing I noticed most about this is that the suggestions are now so much better in Apple Music. So one of the big reasons I used Spotify for so long is because their suggestions and their playlists were just better. But now it's hard to say because it's still so new, but Apple Music suggestions are on point. And I'm not just talking about down here, this new section where we have song suggestions to add to playlist. Yes, those are great, and you can refresh them right here, and you can add them to your playlist very quickly. That is awesome. But I'm also talking about the autoplay feature. When you run out of music, this far, icon right here, autoplay, when you turn that on, I've noticed that the suggestions are much better now because I've been favoriting my favorite artists specifically. I've also been, favoriting different albums and things like that, and they're much better. I don't find myself skipping near as much as I did in the past. And if you missed it this week, I did also post a video on the new AirPods Pro 2nd generation update. And I do have to say that the AirPods Pro 2 are also better here with this new update. And this kind of just corresponds, it kind of goes along with iOS 17.1 because a lot of the features have been improved with the AirPods Pro 2nd generation, mainly around the adaptive audio feature. So if you want to check that out, I've talked about it in depth in a separate video that will be down in the description below and up in the cards in the top right. And I did also want to touch on, and I hate talking about the iPhone 15 specifically, but I did also want to briefly touch on the action button because I did notice for the first time, myself having an accidental trigger with the action button. So thanks to me being on 17.1, my phone was not going off taking pictures or turning on the flashlight when my phone was in my pocket, and it was pushing up against either my skin on one instance and also up against my workbench out in the garage in another instance. And it was the action button, and I felt the little, haptics, but it didn't actually trigger the actions. And that is a new feature in 17.1, where if your phone, it's using the proximity sensors, if it detects that it's upside down and in your phone or in a bag, it's going to prevent certain actions from triggering via the action button. So things like flashlight, things like camera, things like that. Now, silent mode will still work if it's, in your pocket, but certain actions that could lead to battery drain, like, recording a voice memo or taking a picture, stuff like that is disabled. And that is awesome. But yeah, everything else in 17.1 I'll talk about in my What's New video on Monday or Tuesday. So I did also want to talk about the latest batch of Geekbench tests that I did. So I really only did one on this device and one on my main device. And you can see here I scored a 2911 on the single core and a 7208 on the multi-core. And if you take a look, that's actually slightly lower than the first RC build. So we scored a 2932 on that one and a 7316. So higher on both the single core and multi-core for that first RC build. But again, take all these Geekbench scores with a grain of salt. They don't really tell you the full story. They don't really tell you much. I think performance is pretty much on par with 17.0.3. It could even be slightly better. I've really had no hiccups at all with 17.1. It's pretty stable. Now, as far as battery life goes, I am going to pull up my main phone here and take some screenshots because my battery life has been actually really solid on 17.1. I actually think it's better than 17.0.3, but I've not heard the exact same from you guys in the comment section and on, X and things like that. So please let me know in a comment down below how your battery life is after the RC update or the RC2 update if you're on the iPhone 15 series, because a lot of the comments were before the RC came out. So let me know. You can see here my last 24 hours, pretty standard, pretty solid. And then the last 10 days right here as well. I'm going to take a screenshot of that. You can see pretty solid. My usage is up on some days and my battery usage is down, which is indicative of pretty solid battery life here. So really no complaints with battery life whatsoever for me. And you'll notice also that I never have the shutdown overnight bug. I've checked every single day since that came out like 2 weeks ago, and I've not had that issue one time. Now, as far as what to expect next from Apple, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to see 17.1 finally released to the public next week, most likely on the 23rd, but there is a possibility of the 24th as well. One of those 2 days we will see that. And then after that, we might be seeing a 17.2 beta 1. So 17.2 has been in like Mac Rumors analytics for over a month now. So Apple's been working on 17.2 for over a month now, probably longer than that. And we should be seeing the first betas for 17.2 17.2 roll out as early as next week. Now, we could also see a 17.1.1 at some point down here in November. That just depends on if Apple finds any bugs that are worth fixing, any security vulnerabilities that are left over from 17.1, things like that. So we could see a 17.1.1, and as far as a 17.2 final release, we could see that as early as the end of November, but we could even see that into December. It just kind of depends on how these betas fall. And then usually around Christmas time, we have a really slow lull period without a lot of beta. So we're gonna have to push through with these Apple Weekly videos when that day comes, or when that time comes around the holidays. But anyways, let's talk about some of the latest Apple news now, because not a ton going on when we have the full release of 17.1 coming up in just a couple of days. So the first thing I want to talk about is this really crazy new way that Apple plans to update brand new iPhones that are still sealed in the box. So according to Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg, Apple is planning a new system for its retail stores that will update the software on iPhones prior to sale. The company has developed a proprietary pad-like device that the store can place boxes of iPhones on top of. That system can then wirelessly turn on the iPhone, update its software, and then power it back down, all without the phone's packaging ever being opened. Apple aims to begin rolling this out to its stores before the end of the year. So that sounds insanely awesome, but it also kind of sounds like a hacker's dream. I don't know, what the software is like or what this pad-like device is, but that seems like it could be dangerous if put in the wrong hands. That was my first instinct when I heard about this. And I also wonder when this is going to happen. Is this going to happen right when a new update comes out? Are they just going to have, one guy going around just putting this box on top of a bunch of stacks of iPhones? That sounds miserable. Or is it going to be before the person checks out with it? Is every, employee going to have one of these little box type things to update the software? They're just going to put it on top of the box as the person's checking out, and that's going to update it. It's kind of confusing as to how this is going to work. And I will ask an Apple employee at some point, when this is closer to release, how this actually works, the stuff that we haven't heard about yet. So unless you were living under a rock this past week, Apple pulled the biggest troll in years on us. And that's because they released what I'm calling the Apple Pencil SE. So the Apple Pencil with USB-C, they launched that this past week when everybody was expecting a new iPad. But instead, we got this $79 USB-C Apple Pencil, which tells me that 2024 is going to be full of iPad releases, because now it seems, according to Ming-Chi Kuo and pretty much everybody else now, that we're not going to see any new iPads or Macs for the rest of this year, which also, by the way, would be the first time in history that Apple's gone a full year without refreshing any of the iPads. That's never happened before. And this would also be the first time in 6 years that Apple has not updated the regular iPad, just iPad, the base model, because every year they've released that, refresh like clockwork, but not in 2023. So let's dig into those iPads a little bit that could be coming next year, because we already know about the iPad Pro and how that could be redesigned. It could have a bigger screen. We might see that redesigned Magic Keyboard with aluminum to be more like a MacBook. We know about that. We know about the minor refresh that's coming to the iPad and the iPad mini. That's just going to be, spec bumps. We're just going to see a new chip and things like that. But the iPad Air is going to be the most interesting of all of them. And that's because, according to DigiTimes, we could be looking at a 12.9-inch iPad Air. Citing industry sources, DigiTimes highlighted that unlike the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, the 12.9-inch iPad Air will not feature a mini LED display. The device will instead feature the same LCD technology used in the current 10.9-inch iPad Air. So of course, Apple is not going to cannibalize the iPad Pro sales by giving it the same display. So it's going to have a lower resolution display, but still a 12.9-inch iPad Air. I mean, that could be extremely compelling for a lot of people, especially if we see not only bigger displays on the iPad Pro, but also, a much higher price tag as well, which we're expecting to see. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the iPads shake out in 2024. It's going to get even more confusing as if that's what we needed, especially now with the whole Apple Pencil. There's 3 Apple Pencils now. This whole iPad genre of products is just a mess right now. It's so confusing for the average consumer. But anyways, let's move on to the tradition here on the channel, a crazy AirTag story. So this time, a man in Miami had his electric bike stolen after he parked it in a designated bike spot and locked it up. Now, because he had an AirTag on it, he was able to bring the evidence to police, who scouted the area and noticed a homeless man with not only one electric bike, the one that matched the description of the one with the AirTag attached, but also another electric bike that was stolen. After police detained the homeless man, the victim identified the $2,000 bike and was able to retrieve it. But none of that is really out of the ordinary. That stuff happens every day. But what struck me as interesting in this story, and what I think is crazy, is that the homeless man actually discarded one AirTag. So he found an AirTag on the bike and threw it off. But guess what? This guy's smart who had this bike because he had a second AirTag on that bike. And that's what led the police. And you know what got this guy arrested, what got him his bike back, was the fact that he had two AirTags on there. So, you know, if you have something extremely expensive or something that's just really highly likely to get stolen, like a bike, for example, very highly likelihood of getting stolen, put two AirTags in there. Because if somebody's going to try to steal that, I hope no thieves are watching this, but you know, if a thief sees an AirTag, if you put it in an obvious spot and they throw it off, they're not even going to think twice. They're not going to look for another one. Nobody does that. So this is your chance to put one in broad daylight. You know, it's kind of like a decoy for them to throw off, and then have another AirTag somewhere hidden in there. They'll never expect that. They'll never look for a second one. But anyways, the thief was arrested and he was charged with grand theft, tampering with physical evidence, possession of burglary tools, and criminal mischief. And he's in jail right now on a $16,000 bond. And while we're on the topic of AirTags, I did also want to talk about Ming-Chi Kuo's latest prediction for the AirTags second generation, because we've heard about the second gen of AirTags for quite a while now, and Ming-Chi Kuo originally predicted those to come in 2024, but now he's pushed that back to 2025. And the reason being might be pretty interesting, because these could have something to do with the Apple Vision Pro headset. So it could be a way to kind of track the Apple Vision Pro or work with the Apple Vision Pro in some way. And I'm sure it also has something to do with the fact that there's so many lawsuits against the AirTags right now. Apple's probably trying to figure out a way to, you know, mitigate all the issues that are arising from stalkers using these AirTags in a bad way. But anyways, guys, there you have it. That is the latest in the world of Apple. Not a ton going on this week. We know next week is going to be a lot more interesting with 17.1 dropping and potentially 17.2 betas. Hopefully we see that, you know, journal application, fingers crossed on that. But yeah, not a ton going on, but that's how it goes sometimes. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video nonetheless. If you did, I would appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe for more Apple news and iOS news just like this. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching. Check out brandonbutch.com if you want to help support, and I will see you soon.